My mom was placed in a psych ward for attacking her boss at work. For weeks later, my dad was dating that same boss and insisting I call her mom. My mom ended up in a psychiatric hospital after she attacked her boss at work. About a month later, my dad started dating that same boss, and he told me I needed to start calling her. I was only 14. Yeah, my dad was now seeing Vanessa, the woman my mom had just assaulted. It had only been 4 weeks since my mom had a full mental breakdown while she was at her job. From what I heard, she was just sitting there, typing like normal, and then out of nowhere, she lost it, started hitting coworkers, smashing monitors, and eventually went after her boss, Vanessa. They said she was rushed to the hospital, diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and put on a 180-day psychiatric hold. And just 2 days after that, Vanessa showed up at our house with a cheesy smile and a casserole in her hands. My dad welcomed her inside like it was the most normal thing in the world, and from that point on, she basically never left. At first, it was just a few dinners. Vanessa would swing by, check in on us, act all caring. Then she started bringing supplies, helping clean the house, doing little chores here and there. My dad kept going on and on about how forgiving Vanessa was, like she was some kind of saint for overlooking what my mom had done to her. But the thing that messed with my head the most was how happy my dad seemed, not just thankful for the help, but genuinely happy. He laughed at all her dumb jokes, and they'd stay up late talking long after I'd been sent to bed. And every time I asked if I could visit my mom, his face would tighten, and he'd just say she wasn't ready for visitors yet. Vanessa wasn't wasting any time. Within 2 months, she had her own drawer in the house, and she started showing up at my school. She'd take me out for ice cream, ask all kinds of questions about my mom. She'd say things like, "She seemed a bit off before, didn't she?" Or, "She acted strange at home, right?" When I hesitated or said no, Vanessa would reassure me, telling me it was okay to admit my mom had problems. The moment everything snapped for me came the day before what would have been my mom's due date. Yeah, she was pregnant before all this, and I'd been counting down the days on my calendar. That morning, my dad sprang a surprise on me. We were heading off for the weekend to Vanessa's family cabin. My stomach dropped. I told him I didn't want to go, but he snapped at me, said I was being ungrateful. According to him, Vanessa had worked so hard to plan this trip. For us. We fought the entire car ride. I kept asking why we had to leave right then, and he kept dodging the question. Vanessa was in the passenger seat, filing her nails like nothing mattered, occasionally muttering that this was best for everyone. As soon as we got to the cabin, I locked myself in one of the rooms and refused to come out. That night, I could hear them fighting through the thin walls. Vanessa was talking about some kind of paperwork, and my dad sounded nervous, said something didn't feel right. I pressed my ear to the door, and that's when I heard the words that turned my blood cold. Vanessa said, "She signed the divorce papers." Then she added, "Mark, now we can move on." After they went to sleep, I crept into their room and dug through Vanessa's purse. Inside, I found a folder stuffed with photocopies of divorce papers, dated just 3 days earlier. My mom's signature was on them, but something felt off. I'd seen my mom sign stuff a million times, school forms, permission slips, and that wasn't her handwriting. There was also a receipt from a notary service in Vanessa's name and a business card for a family lawyer, Vanessa's last name printed solo, no Mark, in sight. Turned out, Vanessa's brother was a divorce lawyer. The puzzle pieces started clicking into place in my head, and I felt sick. I grabbed my digital camera, the one I'd gotten for my birthday, and snapped photos of everything, then stuffed the camera deep in my backpack. The next morning, I told my dad I wanted to go home. He insisted we were staying the whole weekend, but I caused such a scene that Vanessa finally convinced him to take me back. The second we walked through the door, I grabbed the phone and called my Aunt Sarah. She hadn't heard anything from my mom since her breakdown, and when I told her about the divorce papers, she freaked out. She said she was coming over immediately, and told me to pack a bag. The confrontation that followed, it was rough. Aunt Lynn showed up with my uncle, he's a cop, and demanded to know where my mom was. My dad tried to play it off, saying she was still too sick, but Linda wasn't buying it. She threatened to call the hospital right then and there. Vanessa's face went pale as a ghost, and suddenly she remembered some urgent errand she had to run. We drove straight to the psychiatric center, and that's when I finally saw my mom again, after 6 whole months. She looked like a shell of herself, just sitting there in this gray room, drugged up and barely able to speak. Her words were slurred, slow, like she had to drag each one out. She tried to focus on my face, but her eyes wouldn't stop twitching. And the second she saw Sarah, she broke down crying. She told us she never signed anything, said her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't even hold a pen. Then, before I could even fully process it, she started telling us that the whole thing at work, the violent outburst, never happened. She said Vanessa had cozied up to her, made small talk, then asked to step out and chat about quarterly reports. My mom thought they were headed to a cafeteria, but instead, Vanessa drove her straight to the psych ward's parking lot. When my mom asked where they were, Vanessa locked the doors and started screaming that my mom had threatened her. Security rushed over while Vanessa pounded on the windows, yelling for help. The whole scene made my mom look unstable, especially to a team of strangers who didn't know either of them. Since Vanessa was the supervisor, everyone just believed her story, no one questioned it. They sedated my mom right there in the car before she could even reach for her phone. By the time she came to, Vanessa had already filled out the admittance papers, claiming my mom had been acting violent for weeks. Whenever my mom tried to explain what really happened, the doctors just upped her meds. They said she was in denial, that her memories were just illusions. Linda turned bright red hearing all this. She stormed over to the nurse's station, pulled my mom's file, and started flipping through it. Every single note in that file was handwritten by Vanessa, describing fake incidents my mom swore never happened. Linda pulled out her phone and snapped pictures of every page while the staff scrambled to stop her. We left without being able to take my mom home. She was still locked in. Linda marched straight to the police station, furious, but they told her it was a medical matter. Without solid proof Vanessa had lied, they said they couldn't override a psychiatric hold. Linda slammed her hand on the desk and stormed out. She dropped me off at home, told me she was going straight to a lawyer. That night, I couldn't get the image of my mom shaking hands out of my head. When I got home, Dad and Vanessa were just sitting on the couch watching TV like nothing unusual had happened. I slipped into my dad's office and started digging through his computer, checking out his emails. There were dozens of messages from Vanessa sent over the past few months. But what really stood out were the emails she sent before my mom's breakdown. Vanessa had been messaging my dad about my mom's behavior at work for quite a while. She claimed my mom was making strange mistakes in emails, seemed confused during meetings, and was missing important deadlines. Each email was timestamped and even included attached examples to back up her claims. But something about those dates didn't sit right with me. Some of the messages were supposedly sent on days I knew for a fact my mom was out sick, being tested for the flu. I printed every one of them and hid the stack of papers under my mattress. The next morning, Vanessa made pancakes like everything was normal and asked me how I was coping. I mumbled something about doing okay, and she playfully slapped my shoulder, telling me that trauma shows up in all kinds of ways. Her touch made my skin crawl. The day after that, Linda picked me up from school. She told me they'd found a lawyer who specialized in psychiatric commitments, but we still needed stronger proof to build a case. So we went to visit some of my mom's coworkers at her old office. The security guard knew me from all the times I used to visit my mom, so he let us in. My mom's desk looked like it hadn't been touched in 6 months. Her coffee mug was still there, sitting beside the keyboard, with a dried coffee ring stuck to the back. Everyone seemed uneasy when we started asking about the days she was taken. Most of them repeated the same rehearsed story, that my mom had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her being hospitalized. One coworker even mentioned the bizarre emails she'd been sending out. Linda asked if we could see them. A woman named Jessica pulled them up on her computer. The emails were completely off, full of random capital letters, missing words, and strange ramblings about conspiracies. It was nothing like how my mom normally wrote. I noticed most of them were sent around lunchtime, which was when my mom usually ate alone at her desk. Just as we were about to leave, something on Vanessa's desk caught my eye. There was an open notebook sitting there, and the handwriting looked oddly familiar. While Linda kept the receptionist distracted, I slipped over and started flipping through the pages. My hands started shaking as I read. The notebook was full of rough drafts of those same strange emails, the ones that were supposedly sent by my mom. Each one had a date and time written neatly in the margins. I snapped photos of every page and tucked the notebook back before heading to the car. As soon as we got in, Linda called the lawyer to tell him what we'd found. He said it was helpful, but still not quite enough. We needed something stronger, something that directly tied Vanessa to my mom's commitment. That night I barely slept. My mind kept going back to those weird emails and my mom's trembling hands. The next morning was Saturday, and while Dad and Vanessa went to the store, I had a window of time to look through her things. I found her laptop bag in their closet and fired up her computer. Inside I found email drafts that hadn't been requested by the psychiatric staff. They talked about my mom's treatment plan and even discussed increasing certain medications. The weird part? These were dated after my mom was already admitted. Vanessa was clearly interfering with my mom's treatment, and she had no legal right to do that. I forwarded everything to Sarah's email, then carefully deleted the forwarding record. Just as I was putting the laptop away, I heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. I bolted back to my room right as they came in with groceries. Vanessa called out, asking if I wanted to help cook dinner, but I yelled back that I had homework to do. Later, Lynn told me her lawyer was building the case, but that it might take a few weeks to get everything ready. I couldn't wait that long. Every single day my mom stayed in that place meant more drugs, more damage. So I started recording everything with my digital camera and hiding it in my backpack. The next big clue came while Vanessa was distracted. She was on the phone in the kitchen while my dad was in the shower. I crept down the hallway and heard her saying something about needing emergency commitment forms. She mentioned that once she had medical control, she could keep the commitment going indefinitely. Then she laughed, and said something about it being easier than last time. I caught the whole thing on camera, recording through the small crack in the doorway. Once she hung up, I darted back to my room, heart pounding in my chest. When I played back the footage, the audio was clear, every word could be heard. Linda showed up the next day while Dad was at work. Vanessa tried to block her from coming in, but Linda wasn't having it. She pushed right past her into the house. While they argued in the living room, I slipped back into Vanessa's bedroom to keep digging. This time, I found a folder labeled with the name of an insurance company. Inside were forms for life insurance policies and disability claims under my mom's name. Vanessa had highlighted sections about long-term institutionalization and payment plans for permanent care. It was around then that Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She stared at me and asked what I was doing with her stuff. I lied and said I was just looking for a phone charger. She gave me this cold, disgusted look and said my behavior reminded her of my mom's. Then she dropped a loaded comment, something about how mental illness can run in families. The message was loud and clear. I was next on her list. I left the room while she kept her eyes on me the whole way out. That night, she told my dad she'd scheduled a psychiatrist appointment for me. He argued, said I didn't need that, but Vanessa insisted it was just a precaution. She claimed, given everything I'd been through. She had already made the appointment, at the same facility where my mom was being held. I texted Linda immediately. She called my dad and warned him that if he took me there, she'd file for emergency custody in court. Dad was clearly shaken and upset. He and Vanessa had it out after the call. He said it was too much, too fast, that I was still just a kid trying to deal with trauma. Vanessa's voice went cold. She reminded him of everything she'd done for us. The next morning, she was suddenly all smiles. She cooked my favorite breakfast and even offered to drive me to school. I told her I'd just take the bus. At school, I couldn't focus on anything. Linda messaged me, saying the emergency court order still wasn't solid, we needed more airtight evidence. During lunch, I snuck into the school library to look up information on psychiatric hospital rules. On the computer, I found documents saying that patients had to be regularly evaluated by independent doctors, not just the staff at the unit. I printed it all out and stashed it in my backpack. My hands were trembling the moment I realized Vanessa might have broken several laws. After school, I didn't go home. I hopped on a different bus and headed straight to the downtown public library, a place Vanessa would never think to look for me. Once there, I used one of their computers and started digging into Vanessa's past. Her LinkedIn profile showed she'd bounced around between 3 different companies in the last 8 years, always leaving under vague circumstances. Seeing that pattern made my stomach churn. Using a fake email address, I reached out to a few of her former coworkers. Most didn't respond, but about an hour later, a woman named Amber replied. She confirmed Vanessa had been her supervisor, then asked why I wanted to know. I explained the situation, briefly but honestly. Amber got back to me almost immediately. She said she'd call me from a public phone in 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes later, the library's phone rang. When I picked it up, Amber's voice sounded tight with nerves. She told me something that sent chills down my spine. Vanessa had pulled something similar before. There was an assistant at their office, a woman named Cheryl, who ended up hospitalized after clashing with Vanessa about a work project. Not long after that, Cheryl's husband started dating Vanessa. Everyone in the office thought the whole thing was shady, but no one had any way to prove anything. Cheryl never came back to work after that. I asked Amber if she had any way to reach Cheryl. There was a long pause, but then she finally gave me an email address, warned me to be careful, and hung up. With shaking hands, I wrote a message to Cheryl explaining who I was and everything that had happened with my mom. I didn't expect to hear back, but I knew I had to try. Linda eventually found me at the library. She looked anxious. I'd messaged her earlier, telling her I wasn't taking the bus home. On the ride back, I showed her what I'd found about Vanessa's work history. Linda gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She said we had to move faster than the courts could. We went straight to Sarah's house so I could use her computer without any risks. And there it was, an email from Cheryl waiting for me. It was short, but what she said hit hard. Vanessa had spiked her coffee at work with prescription anxiety meds, which made her look unstable. Cheryl ended up hospitalized for 4 months before her sister hired a private investigator. By then, her husband had already left her, for Vanessa. The divorce was in progress, but she had missed the chance to press charges. Vanessa and her ex had already moved away. Cheryl attached scanned documents from her case, including test results showing the drugs in her system and photos of Vanessa's handwriting on fake reports. It was disturbingly similar to what happened to my mom. Linda immediately sent everything to her lawyer. That night, she drove me back home. Dad was sitting in the living room, and Vanessa was calmly lounging on the couch like everything was fine. Dad demanded to know where I'd been. Before I could answer, Vanessa casually said she'd rescheduled my psych evaluation for the next morning. She'd even called the school to excuse my absence. That's when Linda stepped in and told Dad about Cheryl. Vanessa's expression didn't budge, but her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Dad looked confused. He asked what any of this had to do with our situation. Lynn pulled out her phone and started showing him the emails and evidence we'd gathered. Vanessa stood up slowly and accused Linda of filling my head with paranoid fantasies. Things escalated fast. Dad kept glancing back and forth between them, clearly torn. Vanessa reached out and touched his arm, gently reminding him of how my mom had attacked her, and how she'd been kind enough to forgive everything and step in to help the family. But Linda wasn't having it. She hit back hard with the facts and documents. Vanessa's voice stayed eerily calm as she started suggesting that I was having some kind of breakdown like my mom, that I was inventing stories to cope with the trauma. I bolted to my room and grabbed my digital camera. I played the footage I'd recorded of Vanessa's call, the one where she talked about controlling my mom's treatment. Dad went pale when he heard it. Vanessa lunged forward, trying to snatch the camera, but Linda blocked her. That's when Vanessa finally cracked. She whispered that we couldn't prove anything. Dad slumped onto the couch, buried his face in his hands. He looked up and asked her, point blank, if it was true. Vanessa instantly flipped the script, tears running down her face. She said she loved us, that my mom was truly unstable, and she'd only ever tried to protect our family. Dad just sat there, lost, broken. Lynn pulled me aside and told me to start packing my things. While I was throwing clothes into my backpack, I heard Vanessa in the hallway on the phone. She was talking to someone at the psychiatric center, telling them to increase my mom's medication immediately. Then she said the family was becoming unstable and might need intervention. I stormed into the hallway and confronted her right there by my door. Before things could explode, Linda burst in and said we were leaving, right now. Vanessa had already called the police, telling them I was violent and needed to be evaluated. We slipped out the back door just as sirens started to wail in the distance. Linda drove us straight to her lawyer's office. He was waiting even though it was late at night. He looked over everything we'd brought and told us we finally had enough to make an emergency petition. The next few hours were a blur. The lawyer was on the phone nonstop while Linda sat beside me, holding my hand. By early morning, a judge had accepted the emergency hearing. But the lawyer warned us, Vanessa wasn't going to take this lying down. We stayed the night at a hotel, too on edge to sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about my mom, still locked away, with no idea we were fighting to get her out. The courthouse felt huge and intimidating, with marble floors and towering ceilings. Vanessa arrived dressed to the nines, walking beside her brother, the same divorce lawyer from before. Dad came alone. He looked like he hadn't slept, and kept his eyes on the floor. He didn't speak to anyone. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She quietly read through the evidence while Vanessa's brother tried to paint me as a troubled teen making everything up. Our lawyer kept it calm and professional. He laid out every piece of evidence, emails, fake signatures, Cheryl's testimony, and even the recordings of Vanessa giving instructions for my mom's treatment without legal authority. Vanessa's brother tried to get the recordings thrown out, but the judge allowed them. When the courtroom filled with Vanessa's voice talking about locking my mom up for an indefinite period, you could hear the shock ripple through the gallery. The judge ordered an immediate, independent psychiatric evaluation for my mom. Vanessa's brother tried to argue, said it would interfere with treatment, but the judge shut him down before he could finish. The judge also issued a restraining order that banned Vanessa from contacting the hospital, or anyone in our family. That's when Vanessa's calm exterior finally started to crack. She realized things were slipping out of her control. We didn't waste a second. We headed straight to the psychiatric facility with the court order in hand. The administrator who had been cooperating with Vanessa tried to stall us, but the judge had already sent a warning. An independent psychiatrist showed up within the hour. Mom was brought into a separate room for evaluation. We could see her through the glass. She looked even worse than before. Barely awake, barely present. The psychiatrist spent a full 2 hours with her, going over her file and running cognitive tests. When he came out, his face was grim. He said my mom didn't show any signs of schizoaffective disorder, or any condition that would justify her being institutionalized. He confirmed that the medication she'd been receiving was not only unnecessary, but dangerously excessive. He recommended that she be removed immediately and placed under proper medical supervision to help her safely detox from all the meds. The facility's administrator went ghost white as the psychiatrist laid out the list of violations. The meds had been given without proper authorization, and worse, Vanessa's name had shown up in the treatment records, even though she wasn't a doctor or authorized in any way. The administrator tried to defend himself, saying he just followed the supervisor's instructions, assuming the patient was violent. Sarah's lawyer gave him a cold smile and mentioned the possibility of criminal charges for insurance fraud. That got his attention real quick. He agreed to release my mom immediately and hand over her complete medical records. While the nurses helped get my mom ready for discharge, the administrator was frantically on the phone with the facility's lawyers, his voice full of panic. Mom could barely walk on her own. Linda and I supported her as we led her to the car. She mumbled apologies that didn't even make sense. Her mind was still fogged up from all the drugs. We took her straight to a general hospital. The doctors confirmed that she had been overdosed for months. They started a slow and careful detox process. It was going to take weeks to get the medications out of her system. That night, while she finally rested in a real hospital bed, Linda's phone rang nonstop. Her lawyer called with updates. Turns out, the psychiatric center's administrator had already been arrested for insurance fraud. They'd been billing for high-level treatments my mom never needed. Vanessa's therapist friend, the one who'd signed the bogus assessment, was now under investigation by the medical board. The next morning, my dad showed up at the hospital. He looked shattered as he sat next to Mom and held her hand while she slept. He told Linda he'd kicked Vanessa out and changed all the locks. Vanessa didn't take it well. She threatened to sue him for breaking promises. But he didn't care anymore. He just kept apologizing to Mom, even though she was still asleep. The next few days were a blur. I bounced back and forth between Linda's house and the hospital. The police wanted to talk to me about Vanessa, but Linda's lawyer made sure he was there for every conversation. I gave them all my recordings and photos. The detectives said they were building a solid case, especially now that Cheryl had agreed to testify about Vanessa's pattern. Mom's recovery was slow and heartbreaking. As the meds cleared from her system, she became more alert, but also more aware of everything that had happened. She broke down when she realized that 6 months of her life had been stolen from her. The doctor said the emotional scars would take even longer to heal than the physical ones. But Vanessa wasn't finished, not yet. She made one last desperate move. She called my dad from a blocked number and claimed she was pregnant. He hung up on her, but it clearly shook him. Linda's lawyer advised him to demand a paternity test if she kept pushing the claim. Dad was at his breaking point. He even started seeing a therapist, trying to understand how he'd been manipulated so completely. A week later, the police arrested Vanessa at her apartment. She was caught packing, clearly planning to flee the city. They discovered she'd done this before, at least twice, always targeting women in leadership roles, getting them committed, then swooping in to seduce their husbands. Her brother was arrested, too, charged with conspiracy and fraud for forging the divorce papers. After 2 weeks, Mom was finally released from the hospital, but she couldn't bring herself to return home. She stayed with Linda instead. I split my time between their places, just wanting to be close to her. Little by little, I watched her come back to life. Her hands were the first to stop trembling. Then, slowly, her eyes started focusing again. But the fear in her voice whenever she mentioned Vanessa, that never quite went away. The prosecutor's case was rock solid. Thanks to our evidence and the testimonies from other victims, it didn't take long to uncover just how far Vanessa's abuse had spread. 2 more women came forward after hearing about her arrest. Both shared nearly identical stories. They'd been drugged, institutionalized, and watched their lives fall apart while Vanessa cozied up to their husbands. The pattern was undeniable and damning. Dad decided to sell the house. He couldn't stand being there anymore, not with all the memories and the guilt. He found a small apartment near Linda's and focused on repairing things with Mom. Their talks were hard. There were tears, confessions, apologies, but they were needed. I went back to school, but I couldn't focus. Some kids whispered about my family drama. A few called me a hero for saving my mom. Others said I was just as crazy as she was. I ate lunch alone in the library, counting down the days until Vanessa's trial. Some of her former coworkers even reached out to Mom to apologize. They admitted they'd been fooled by Vanessa's lies. Jessica came by Linda's house in tears. She explained how Vanessa had tricked everyone at the office. She'd faked emails, put on a caring act, made herself look like the only one who could manage my mom's supposed issues. Meanwhile, the fraud investigation against the psychiatric center kept growing. Turns out, they'd been running this scam for years, with Vanessa's therapist friend helping push fake diagnoses. Other families started coming forward with stories about their loved ones being committed without cause. That place was facing massive lawsuits and criminal charges. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it felt like something had been made right. Mom began physical therapy to regain her strength. Months of lying in bed and overmedication had drained her completely. I went with her to every session, watching her fight to complete the simplest exercises. She never once complained, just kept going, quiet and determined. He kept trying to mess with her memory, saying the medication might have scrambled her timeline, made her think she wasn't stable even before things went downhill. But my mom held tight to the witness stand and answered every question with a steady voice. When they showed her the fake divorce papers, she calmly pointed out 3 very specific flaws in the signature that proved it wasn't hers. I was sitting close enough to catch all of it. My backpack with the digital camera was right at my feet. The prosecutor asked me to come forward with the documents, the doctored emails, the camera recordings of Vanessa's phone conversations. Vanessa's brother kept objecting, over and over, but the judge waved him off and let it all in. When they played the audio clip of Vanessa talking about keeping my mom locked away, some of the jurors actually shook their heads in disbelief. It felt like the questioning would never end. Vanessa's brother tried to paint me as a confused, attention-seeking teen, someone desperate to blame others for his mom's breakdown. He even suggested I'd made up the evidence, tampered with recordings, spun this whole thing into a conspiracy. But I stayed calm. I stuck to the facts, just like the prosecutor had told me to. The judge had to warn Vanessa's brother twice for the way he was treating me on the stand. Then Cheryl flew in from another state to testify in person. She told her story in heartbreaking detail, how Vanessa had slipped something into her coffee, how she ended up committed under false pretenses, how she temporarily lost custody of her kids. She brought proof, too, medical reports that showed the same anxiety meds found in my mom's system were in hers. Vanessa stared her down during the entire testimony. Cheryl never once looked back. The administrator from the psychiatric unit had agreed to a deal and testified against Vanessa too. He admitted to faking treatment logs, billing for made-up services, and taking bribes to keep patients committed longer than necessary. He said Vanessa had personally called him about my mom's meds, even though she had no legal power to do so. His testimony went on for 3 hours and dragged in 2 other employees from the facility. Even Vanessa's old therapist showed up, though she'd already lost her license. She claimed Vanessa had tricked her too, told her my mom was dangerous and needed to be evaluated immediately. But the prosecutor tore that excuse apart by pointing out she'd written her evaluation before she ever met my mom. She left the witness stand in tears. My dad testified on day 4. He looked smaller somehow, like the guilt had weighed him down physically. He admitted that Vanessa had slowly poisoned his view of my mom, how he'd signed papers without reading them, how he believed Vanessa when she said mom was mentally unstable, even when something felt off. When asked why he trusted Vanessa so much, he said he'd felt lonely, and Vanessa had been kind and attentive. Then came Vanessa's bank records. They showed deposits that matched up with my mom's insurance payouts. Money had gone to the facility manager, to the therapist, even to the so-called board that had verified my mom's signature. The paper trail was long, and it was damning. Vanessa's face stayed blank through all of it, even as the transactions flashed across the courtroom projector. More victims testified via video. One woman described an almost identical setup from Vanessa's first job. Another told how her mother ended up drugged and mentally broken after Vanessa started seeing her dad. Story after story revealed the same pattern, clear, cruel, and calculated. Jurors were scribbling down notes like crazy. Vanessa's defense was flimsy at best. Her brother brought in character witnesses, who barely knew her. He gave weak explanations that made no sense and tried to discredit all the evidence. He said my mom really had needed treatment, that I misunderstood everything, and that the other victims were just jumping on the bandwagon. Nobody in that room was buying it. When Vanessa finally took the stand, she played the victim card hard. She claimed my mom had threatened her, that she was only ever trying to help us, and that the whole courtroom was ganging up on her. She cried at the right moments, dabbed her eyes with tissues, gave pleading looks to the jury. But when the prosecutor asked her specific questions about the forged signatures, she stumbled. Her story started falling apart right there. The prosecutor's final statement was brutal in its precision. He took the jury through each of Vanessa's crimes step by step, showed how she'd refined this scheme over the years, how cold and deliberate her actions were. He reminded them of my mom's trembling hands, of the months she spent overmedicated and isolated, of the families Vanessa had destroyed for money. He asked them to give her the maximum sentence on every charge. Vanessa's brother made one last desperate plea during closing arguments. He said she was misunderstood, that she'd made mistakes but didn't deserve jail time. He asked for community service instead. A couple of jurors actually rolled their eyes. No one was buying it anymore. The jury only took 4 hours to reach a decision. We waited in a small room. Mom held my hand while Linda paced. Dad sat in the corner, quietly staring at his phone. When they brought us back in, Vanessa didn't move a muscle while the foreman read the verdict. Guilty on every count. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of unlawful confinement. Guilty of conspiracy. The list just kept going. Vanessa finally broke down when the judge read out her sentence. 10 years in federal prison, with 5 years of probation after that. She was ordered to pay restitution to every victim. Her nursing license was permanently revoked. She started screaming that we'd ruined her life, that my mom was crazy, that the court had made a huge mistake. They had to drag her out of the courtroom, still shouting. Outside, the other victims surrounded my mom with hugs. They exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. One of them put her hand on my shoulder and thanked me for having the courage to dig deeper and not give up. The prosecutor shook all of our hands, saying it was one of the most airtight cases he'd ever brought to trial. We drove back to Linda's place in silence. Mom stared out the window, Linda focused on traffic. I sat in the back seat, finally letting myself feel just how heavy everything had been. Months of fear, fighting, and uncertainty, and it was finally over. The trial was over, but the cure would take much longer. That night, Mom prepared dinner for the first time since she was released. Her hands remained firm as she cut vegetables. Linda and I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the family space. She made spaghetti with garlic bread. Nothing sophisticated, but the flavor was the best we had ever eaten. Dad called the next morning. He had found a new job. He said he would understand if I didn't forgive him. He promised to do what was necessary to fix our relationship. I told him it needed time. He agreed and didn't insist. We agreed to make weekly calls and see what would happen. Mom decided to look for a new job instead of returning to the old company. Many memories, many people who believed in Vanessa's lies. She updated her resume and began to apply for vacancies in smaller companies. The interviews were very successful. I was able to find a job in a small company. Find a job in a small company.